What's up and welcome back to the Metalhead Car Show. A little while ago, I did a video looking at 10 cars that must come back from the dead. And it's a tricky topic because there are more than 10 cars that need to come back from the dead. So here's part 2 of 10 cars that must come back. Let's get right into it. Starting off with the Mazda Cosmo. So the Mazda Cosmo is Mazda's sporty luxury coupe they've been doing since the 1960s. And I kind of think the last variant they did, which was like really early 90s or mid 90s, was kind of the coolest one they did. It looks really nice and it has like a 300 horsepower 3-rotor in it. And I think it's always just kind of been this really underrated JDM legend. But as I said in the video that I did a little while ago, I do think the idea of bringing back the rotary at this point is kind of a silly idea. But if Mazda is doing it for the new CX-30, then why not? Especially if you're doing a rotary hybrid system, this would be a great use for it. I would just want to make sure that the hybrid system used and the rotary used are kind of like at their absolute best, so it's not just a gimmicky use of an engine. But what would I do? What would I compete it against? Well, I'd shoot for about 400 horsepower. Maybe make it not quite Mustang competition, but performance-wise, have it in that kind of ballpark, but have it just have like a nicer interior, be a bit more comfy and luxurious than you'd get from your Mustang, Camaro, or Challenger. And for the hell of it, give it a 3-rotor. Let's make this thing wild. Next up, the Nissan Mid 4. So this was a mid-engine concept car Nissan made back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And when they were doing it then, it was kind of this Ferrari-styled, kind of pretty, subtle but pretty Nissan that was using the 300ZX engines. I think by the end of it, using a twin-turbo V6, the one that was used in the kind of like the last 300ZX, use that engine in a car that kind of looks very Ferrari-ish, would have been a real threat to both Ferrari and Porsche at that time. I find these cars stunning. It's not super in your face and it's not super like textbook beautiful, but at the same time, it has this kind of super elegant subtleness to it with still being very cool. More interesting than a C4 Corvette, but not quite in your face as a Ferrari 348 or a Honda NSX. How would I do it? I would start with the Nissan Z engine, which is like a 400 horsepower 3-liter V6. Maybe up that just a little bit and make a new mid-engine platform off it. Very much easier said than done. So I would do that, keep the cost a little bit lower, and have it kind of go up against the entry-level Porsche 911s, but for way less money. If Nissan could keep the weight down and keep the cost down, but still have this kind of really cool mid-engine performance car, it'd be a huge threat towards the C8 Vet and the 911. Now that would mean Nissan would need to bring back a kind of obscure 30-something-year-old concept car and make a full mid-engine platform for it when money's already tight. But seeing as though Nissan still has the GTR, still has the Nissan Z, and has poked at things like the IDX and the Delta Wing, I think there's some people in Nissan who probably really want to do this. Next up, the weirdo on the list, the Ford Skyranger. So the Ford Skyranger was made in the late 1980s, early 1990s as this convertible Ford Ranger. Now, Ford made like less than 20 of these. They are super rare, they look so weird, and I think if you went to most Ford fanatics, they might not know what it actually is. But I think getting the current Ford Ranger body and making it a convertible would actually be really cool. The convertible body isn't really something Ford's ever tried to work with in the mass production sort of thing, and I think outside of the Bronco, the only time they've really done this is with the Skyranger. But is there a market for convertible pickup trucks? Honestly, I kind of think so. Yes, we're never going to see a convertible Ram, Silverado, F-150 Cybertruck, but we do have the Jeep Gladiator, which you can pull off most of the roof. You do have the Bronco, which you can pull off most of the roof, and you do have the Jeep Wrangler, which, again, you can pull off most of the roof. So there is some demand for it. So honestly, like, why not? Have a soft top but electric folding roof that tucks away in between the bed and the back seats. You probably lose a little bit of space both ways, but done right, probably wouldn't lose too much. And I think this thing would look actually generally cool. I'd put a roll bar on it for, well, safety purposes. But other than that, I wouldn't really play with it too much or make it this huge deal of, it's convertible. Make it a convertible, market it to the audiences that are really going to eat that shit up. And I think this would actually sell like hotcakes. As long as they get the chassis worked out. We don't want another Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet. Next up, and we're going weird here, the Plymouth Prowler. Yes, Plymouth is dead, I'm fully aware. At the end of its life, the Prowler was actually marketed as the Chrysler Prowler, and Chrysler's done this with a few models. I believe with the Dodge Viper, it was actually marketed as the Chrysler Viper in Europe around the end of the second generation. And you have things like the Neon, that's been a Dodge, a Plymouth, and a Chrysler, so there has been some bad sharing. The Prowler was made in the mid-90s when Dodge was really starting to get some cool stuff back in their lineup. By the time of the mid-90s, Dodge had the RT Ram, the RT Cherokee, the Dodge Viper, the Dodge Stealth. I think the sporty Neons may have been getting in there at that point. The Prowler, and they were also advertising Lamborghini at that point because Chrysler owned Lamborghini in the 90s. And the Prowler was kind of this really cool, super oddball car. It had this really like retro throwback triangle design with a open front wheel or exposed front wheel front end. It had an independent rear suspension. It had a rear-mounted gearbox, a rear end that was, from what I've heard, the same width as a Ferrari F50, super fat rear tires. They were all convertible, and it had a van engine up front. I've always found that a really weird concept. I've always thought putting the 5.9, or at least having a 5.9 option, would have been really cool for the Prowler. Some disagree. If you go watch Tyler Hoovey's channel, he actually did some work on a Prowler, and he made it fast. He made it so that V6 really worked, and showed you didn't actually need a V8 in it. But what would I do now? I would keep the styling similar. And by similar, I really just mean keep a very similar body shape, but otherwise make it modern. So a similar triangle shape, exposed front wheels, keep that. I would keep the grille similar, but maybe have it either black or a bit more open, or the illusion of it being a bit more open. I'd have a 6-cylinder entry-level car, but I'd have the top model be either a 6.4 engine or maybe even an EV, since that is the route Dodge is going. What would the use be? Cool cruiser. Make it look awesome, make it kind of fun in a straight line, give it a nice soft suspension, and make it a really awesome late night cruiser. Would it sell? I have absolutely no idea if this would actually sell. It would be really cool if people were into it though. And next up, a big BMW Z Roadster. Now what I mean by this is something like the Z8 or the concept car from like 2004-ish, 2003-ish, the BMW Z9. Now the Z9 never happened. If you look at the concept car photos, it was just a concept car for the upcoming BMW 6 Series. But I think at this point it's been long enough, and it would be cool to see it come back. Now when it was around and kind of at its peak, it was the Z8. Now the Z8 wasn't particularly an amazing car. I've heard it had kind of like an identity issue of it wants to be a sports car but doesn't handle very well. It wants to be a drag car but isn't quite fast enough. It wants to be a cruiser but the suspension isn't really good enough, and it kind of keeps having these issues. But they are drop dead gorgeous. I stand by saying it's the best looking BMW ever, which is a fairly common opinion. And I think due to those looks, the Z8 has really kind of skyrocketed in value as of recently. So what would I do? I would start with the premise of the Z8. Make it beautiful. Make it just the best looking thing anyone's seen. Don't make it look like a new BMW i car. They look cool, they are not beautiful. Now the engine. The BMW Z8 in the past used the BMW M5 engine, so you can actually go that route. Or you crank it right up to 11 and use the BMW M8 competition engine, which I believe makes like 630 something horsepower. 630 something horsepower from a very pretty two-door Roadster. Try to convince me people won't be into that. The most unrealistic part of this, other than it happening, is BMW knowing when to stop on designing it. I find there's a lot of BMWs that look kind of cool but just have a little bit too much going on. So this would need to be very much dialed back to be perfect. Nonetheless, I think it would be awesome to see. Next up, the fastest car on the list and a true icon from Chrysler again, the Chrysler ME 412. Yes, the teenagers of 2007 are screaming right now. Same here. So when the ME 412 was shown off, the plan was Chrysler was going to make 300 copies of it per year. It was going to use a twin-turbo AMG V12, and I think it was going to make like 750 horsepower. Now, I don't know how true this is, but I have heard the ME 412 didn't really happen due to Mercedes not allowing Chrysler to make a supercar faster than their peak supercar at the time, which was the SLR McLaren. Which, funny enough, there was actually a music video of the two of them together. And I think the fact that Mercedes had that rule is kind of a shame, because, yeah, the Chrysler would be faster, but you could make some sort of weird rule saying Chrysler would have to say it's AMG powered and it's not Chrysler. And at that point, why not? I gotta be dreaming, 'cause I never felt like this. So it didn't happen, but honestly, we went into recession not that long later, so I think they probably wouldn't have sold that well and would have gotten really cheap. Which means now at this point they would have quadrupled its original value and nobody would be able to afford one. So what would I do? Well, I would stick to something kind of the same design. I would make it look similar. Not the exact same, because Chrysler just doesn't really look like that anymore, but I think you could use kind of the bulk of that body and it would still pass today. Since Fiat has a pretty dominant hand in Chrysler, I would truthfully borrow a Ferrari engine to put in this. Now, assuming Ferrari would just let anyone use a V12 is foolish, but going under the same premise and using a twin-turbo V12, I think would make a awesome product. Supposed to the original 750, you probably easily make 1,000 or 1,100 horsepower from this thing with zero problems. Other than that, give it a nice interior, make it actually be able to handle that power, and make it. I don't think this needs to be a race car. I don't think it really needs to break the Nürburgring lap record, but if they made a, let's just say, Bugatti competition where it's nice, it's comfortable, it has a very nice interior, everything's made very well, and it's really fast, I think it would go down well. But among everything on this list, I think that's the number one car that we are absolutely never going to get, and it's just this kind of cool dream of our past, along with Cadillac Cian. Next up, and the last SUV or truck on the list, the GMC Cyclone. Now I say Cyclone, but I think you do the Cyclone and Typhoon, and it would work pretty easily. Now the Cyclone was a performance-oriented SUV GMC made back in the 1980s using the twin-turbo Buick engine from the Grand National. They were doing pretty impressive quarter-mile times, and it was one of the very early performance-based trucks and SUVs. And truthfully, I would stick to that very same premise. Get the Canyon, shorten the wheelbase a little bit for the truck version, which is the Typhoon, and use the twin-turbo V6 from the Cadillac ATS, which I hope is still being used so I don't sound like a fool, and then put some aggressive gearing in it, paint it black, and call it. Make it the performance-oriented truck it needs to be. Don't go crazy on it. Seeing the new Corvette Z06 engine in it would be cool, but let's face it, it's very much not necessary. The original car made like 280 horsepower. They used that 460 horsepower Cadillac V6. I think it would be more than enough. Fast SUVs exist and all these parts exist, so truthfully, why not? If you keep the cost down, these things would sell really really well. And you wouldn't really need to make anything new to actually make this happen. So I think this is one of the cooler ideas on the list because it's actually somewhat realistic. But on a side note, I've always found the idea of using the Camaro platform or the ATS platform and making a new Buick Grand National on that platform, that engine, maybe a bit of a tune to it, would have been awesome. But seeing the Camaro is more than likely going out of production next year, I have my doubts. Next up, the Nissan Silvia. We're seeing a JDM renaissance happen right now. We have a new Z, we have the GTR, we have the Integra back, we have Type Rs on the go. There's a lot of cool things happening right now, and I think this would be a great time for Nissan to bring this back. Now in North America, we haven't got the Silvia or here the 240 since 1998, I believe, 97, 98. It was the S14 chassis. But Japan, and I guess other parts of the world, got this to 2001 or 2 with the gorgeous S15. And from rumors that I've heard, Nissan had the option to either do a S16 or the Juke back in 2009, 2010, and they chose Juke, which hurts my heart so much. So the entry-level rear-wheel drive sports car market isn't untouched, but there's not that much there. Like you have the GR86, the Miata, which are killing it, and you have some of the entry-level like Dodge Chargers and Camaros for the time being, but I'd say there's not really that much. So Nissan bringing a new 240 Silvia back would be a great time to do that, to kind of get into that market. Now, if they can keep the cost down, make it stylish, give it a handful of kind of neat features, but don't go super crazy on it, and give it some good engine options, this thing would be killer. Would I expect this car to actually come back? Honestly, no. The S650 Mustang is based on the S550 but heavily modified, and I'm pretty certain the new Nissan Z is kind of the same deal. So manufacturers are trying to stretch everything they have right now to save as much money as they can. So as I said with the other Nissan I have on the list, it's so unlikely it would happen due to they need to make a all-new chassis for this car. Along with that, if this were to happen, I think you'd be seeing Nissan kind of make an engine just for this, which is, again, even more money. I have this pretty high on the list because it's, I think, very desirable, but doesn't make sense. So we can hope, we can dream, if we scream loud enough, maybe we'll get it in the future, but I don't know. Next up, the Honda S2000. So as I just mentioned, we are in a JDM renaissance, and a lot of the companies are taking part in this. Honda's no exception. And I think if the S2000 were to ever come back, now is a brilliant time. Honda has a new line of engines that are absolutely awesome they didn't have then, and they're making some wickedly fast cars. When the S2000 came out in the early 90s, it was manual only, 4-cylinder, rear-wheel drive convertible that was actually really stylish. So stick to that premise. Really take a stab out of the Miata and the BRZ. Much like I said with the ME412, make it look similar, but updated. Unfortunately, if you make it new, people are going to whine, and if you can just hit the ground running with this, you're going to do so much better. Drivetrain, keep them all manual. Honda will likely need to borrow a drivetrain from someone else to keep costs down, or they're going to need to make an all-new full-size gearbox for this car, which I don't really see happening. But if you did that, use the Honda Civic Si engine along with the Type R engine for like a higher up option, a Type R S2000, which I think would be really cool. This thing would be absolutely wicked. There wouldn't be that much competition for it. There is love and demand for these things because you look at the old cars, the prices are actually slowly trickling up. And with this JDM renaissance happening, there hasn't really been a better time to make one of these things until now. Last up on the list, the Ford Torino. So the Torino came out in the 1960s, and I believe it went to the late 1970s, but its premise was always kind of the muscle car, but the bigger muscle car, way bigger than the Mustang, more Chevelle and Charger competition. And its peak of being at its coolest and most aggressive was definitely like 1968, 1969, 1970, maybe 1971. So what would I want now? Truthfully, Dodge Charger competition. Ford already has these chassis in existence. Ford has been making high-power V8 sedans in Australia for like the past 20 years. So I think if you got one of those and kind of do what Pontiac did with the G8, use the Holden platform to make it the Pontiac G8, use that Ford Falcon platform to make the Torino. Is making a sedan a cop-out? Well, maybe, but truthfully, get over it. You're not going to see Ford make two coupes, one slightly bigger than the other, just to get the historical accuracy of the Torino. And using the Falcon platform would save Ford a lot of money in regards of actually making this come to life. So along with that, go to the Mustang for the engines, give it a manual option. That'll actually give it an edge on the Charger for the enthusiast market, but mainly keep it the automatic, give it a 10-speed automatic, give it a manual option, give it a good list of engines, and this thing would likely do great. Ford bailed out of making cars in North America in like 2018, 2019, with the exception of the Mustang, but truthfully, they've never offered this. The last time Ford offered a performance-oriented V8 sedan in North America would have been probably back in the 1970s. So on Ford's end, it's kind of uncharted territory, but also, as I said earlier, look at the Charger. The Charger's been here for like almost 20 years now, and it's kind of done great. And if the Charger's going to be turning into an EV coupe pretty soon, then it would be a brilliant move for Ford to swoop in and take over the performance-oriented sedan in North America. All the building blocks are there for this one. It just needs to happen. I want to know, what do you think? Do you agree with my list? Or are there some cars you want to see come back that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed what you've seen. I post on Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday, and I'll see you later.